Celebes, now Sulawesi, is an island of many mountain ranges and gorges. It was part of Dutch East Indies colonies since 19th centuries, and the world's 11th largest island. In 1941 the population of the whole island was estimated around 3 million Indonesian with 7 ethnic group. The island was poorly developed, and the number of towns and villages limited. The island also was rich in nickel, and also had large reserves of iron ore. Key locations on this island, which Dutch airfield was built, were Menado, Makassar, and Kendari. Makassar, the largest city in Celebes, served as the island capital. Maluku Island, meanwhile, are an archipelago in eastern Dutch East Indies. The islands were known as the Spice Islands due to the nutmeg, mace, and cloves that were originally exclusively found there, the presence of which sparked colonial interest from Europe in the 16th century. The city of Ambon on Ambon Island, which had developed of old as a spice trade center, served as the region's center. In the area of Buna in East Tanseram, there was an oil field. Celebes and Maluku Island was the objectives for Japanese because they required a network of major airfields on these islands, which was closer to Java and Sumatra, for the ultimate battle in the Dutch East Indies capital, Batavia. The task to fend off Japanese attacks was given to the Celebes Defense Force, with the Celebes Garrison Battalion, 10 assorted reserve and home guard companies, and minimal artillery and anti-aircraft units. The Celebes Defense Force, under the command of Colonel Mvoren, were 3,100 troops strong. These troops were divided to 3 key cities in Celebes. First was the Menado garrison, numbered approximately 1,500 men and officers, under the command of Major B.F. Mola. The garrison also were strengthened by 2 artillery guns, and 3 very old 3.7 cm naval guns. With these very limited forces, Major Mola had to defend the airfields at Langone, and at Mapangket, the naval base at Tasoka and Menado. If the enemy forces were too strong, he was instructed to regroup his units inland and start a guerrilla war. Second were Kendari garrison, numbered approximately 400 men, commanded by KNIL officers, Captain F.B. Van Strelin. The units also consisted of 2 anti-aircraft battery and 4 armored cars. Third were Makassar garrison, numbered approximately 1,200 men. The garrison was commanded by Colonel Mvoren. Meanwhile, on Maluku Island, the Allies seen the island of Ambon was to be a strategic location because of its potential as a major air base. The Australian government and military commanders saw that it could be used in raids on northern Australia and decided to reinforce the Dutch forces on the island. At the outbreak of war on the 8th of December, Ambon was garrisoned by the 2,800-strong Maluku Brigade of the Royal Netherlands East Indies Army Garrison, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Kapits, and consisting of Indonesian colonial troops. This garrison was poorly equipped and trained. The Australian army of 1,100-strong Gulf Force, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Roach, arrived on the 17th of December. The force consisted of the 21st Battalion from the Australian 8th Division, as well as some divisional artillery and support units. Lieutenant Colonel Kapits was appointed Allied commander on Ambon. Roach later was replaced by Major Scott, due to his protest of inadequate forces for the defense of Ambon. The garrison was also supported by the Dutch KNI Air Service and the Royal Australian Air Force. The KNI Air Service sent number 2 flight, consisted of 4 Brewster Buffaloes, but 2 crashed en route to Ambon. The Royal Australian Air Force sent 2 flights, comprising 12 Lockheed Hudson Mk2 light bombers. 1 flight was based at Ladha and another was sent to Namal on the neighbouring island of Buru. The Celebes invasion task will strike through the Eastern Force, commanded by Vice Admiral Ibo Takahashi, conducted operations from eastern Borneo, east through Celebes, Ambon, Timor, and eastward to New Guinea. The fleet was intended to land at Menado, Kendari, Ambon, Makassar, Timor, and Bali. Operations ashore in Celebes were conducted entirely by the IJN Special Naval Landing Forces and occurred simultaneously with the IJA and IJN landings on Tarakan. The Special Naval Landing Forces were a naval infantry force, roughly equivalent to the US Marine Corps, and were a part of the IJN land forces. They were an elite force and formed for specific attack mission. The unit involved in this invasion were Sasebo Combined Landing Force and the Yokosuka 1st Special Naval Landing Force as a paratrooper unit. These units concentrated at Davao prior to the invasion. The combined Sasebo Special Naval Landing Force was about 2,500 men strong, under the command of Captain Kunizo Maori. It had been formed temporarily from the Sasebo 1st and the Sasebo 2nd Special Naval Landing Force units. A company of Type 95 Hargo light tanks was attached to the unit. The 1st Yokosuka Special Naval Landing Force, numbered of 334 men, was a naval parachute unit under Commander Toyoki Horiuchi. These units were tasked to land and capture Menado on the 11th of January, then proceed to Kendari on the lowest coast of the southeast peninsula on the 24th of January. The unit were to capture the strategically important airfield at Kendari. Capturing airfields was a priority second only to the petroleum facilities in the Dutch East Indies, for they brought land-based Japanese fighters and bombers incrementally closer to future battlefields farther south on the southern road. The airbase at Kendari was destined to be one of the most important. Centrally located within the Dutch East Indies, it would be an important refueling stop. It was also the base of operations for the future devastating air bombing attack on Darwin, Australia, and on Java and Timor Island. After securing Kendari, the Japanese Sasebo Combined Special Naval Landing Force were to move east toward Makassar, the island capital near the end of the South Peninsula. Meanwhile, for the invasion of Moluccas Island, the same IJN task force, commanded by Vice Admiral Ibo Takahashi, included the aircraft carriers Hugh and Soryu, 2 heavy cruisers, the light cruiser Jinsu, 15 destroyers, 10 transport ship, 2 seaplane tenders, 5 minesweepers, 4 submarine chasers, and 2 patrol boats. Were tasked to proceed to east of Celebes toward Moluccas Island after the Kendari operation. Both of Japanese aircraft had been part of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto Pearl Harbor Strike Force. As in Borneo, the ground operation at Ambon was to be a joint operation between the IJA and the IJN Special Naval Landing Forces. The latter contingent included 820 men from the 1st Kuri Special Naval Landing Force, while the IJA contingent of approximately 4,500 men was centered on the 228th Infantry Regiment, one of 3 regiments in the 38th Division, which had taken part in the conquest of Hong Kong. This joint force was known as the Ito Detachment, and commanded by Major General Takeo Ito, who had commanded the entire 38th Division at Hong Kong, and who operated at Ambon under the banner of the division's headquarters. On the 9th of January 1942, 8 transport ship carrying the Sasebo Combined Special Naval Landing Force departed Davao, escorted by cruiser Jinsu, 11 destroyer, 2 seaplane tender, 5 minesweeper, and 3 sub-chaser, under the command of Rear Admiral Raizo Tanaka. On the 11th of January, 2,500 men of the 1st and 2nd Sasebo Special Naval Landing Force conducted the initial amphibious landing near the northern Celebes cities of Menado and Kima before dawn, overwhelming the outnumbered KNIL defenders. The defense unit at Menado, which numbered only 388 men, were not enough to oppose the thousands of the 1st Sasebo Special Naval Landing Force troops. Overwhelming by the attack, the Dutch unit retreated to the south, and by 1500 hours, after KNIL ran out of ammunition, they had to retreated to Kakasgassen. At Kima, the landings started at 3 o'clock and were made swiftly. When the first Japanese troops, including 3 tanks, reached Adyamadidi at 900 hours, the Dutch unit, under the command of Lieutenant Radima, tried to stop the Japanese advance with few available troops. But at last, he had to withdraw from Adyamadidi and planned to start a guerrilla war. However, due to high rate of native troops desertion, he had to give up this plan. Meanwhile, staging out of Davao, 28 transport variants of the Mitsubishi G3M medium bomber carried more than 300 paratroopers from the 1st Yokosuka Special Naval Landing Force to a drop zone behind the invasion beaches. Landing at about 9:30 a.m. on the 11th of January, the paratroopers surprised the Dutch defenders and began an assault on the airfield at Lane Goan and the seaplane base at Kakas. The defense of the airfield at Lane Goan was under the command of Captain W.C. van den Berg, ordered his unit to counterattack the airfield. A second airborne attack by the 1st Yokosuka on the 12th of January brought additional landing forces to Lane Goan airfield and assured the capture of the airfield. The Japanese paratroopers suffered heavy casualties in this battle. Enraged by the heavy losses, the Japanese executed a large number of KNIL prisoners of war. Knowing that the battle was lost, Van den Berg ordered his remaining troops to retreat inland and start a guerrilla war. Though some of the Dutch troops managed to hide out in the mountains for about a month, northern Celebes was secured by the middle of the month. Captain van den Berg and his group were taken prisoner on the 20th of February. Before his capture, his group managed to attack the Japanese units on several occasions and inflicted heavy casualties. After securing Menado, Captain Kunzio Mori 1st and 2nd Sasebo departed from Menado, headed south to Kendari, escorted by the same IJN convoy escort fleet, part of Eastern force that bound for Kendari. They came ashore in Kendari at 4:28 hours on the 24th of February. They soon reached their main objective, the Kendari airfield. Due to communication problem, the KNIL garrison were unprepared and everybody on the airfield was panicking, making it easy for the Japanese to capture the airfield. By the evening of the 24th of January 1942, Kendari was fully occupied. Most of the Dutch KNIL troops officer, commanded by Captain F.B. van Strelin, were captured by the Japanese. Some fought a guerrilla war for a short period, while others tried to escape to safer parts of the archipelago. Kendari Air Base was considered the best in the Dutch East Indies and was immediately put into operation by the Japanese 21st Air Flotilla. Between 25th to the 26th of January, 25 Japanese fighters and 27 bombers landed on the airfield. Prior to the Japanese landings on Menado and Tarakan, an enemy air raid was launched against Ambon. Both Dutch fighters in Ambon were shot down on the 15th of January. On the 16th of January, in a daylight raid, some of the Hudsons were destroyed. On the day of the Japanese landing at Kendari, the 24th of January, the carriers Soryu and Hugh attacked Ambon with 35 aircraft. The last few remaining serviceable Hudsons evacuated after the 28th of January. Sumo air or naval support would remain for the defense of Ambon. On the 27th of January, the invasion fleet with 10 transport ships carrying the Kuri 1st Special Naval Landing Force and the Ito detachment departed from Davao for the Ambon operation. The fleet was sighted by Australian airmen on the 29th of January. On Dutch orders, the Australian engineers destroyed naval oil reserves, bomb dumps, hangars, and other equipment at Ladha and sought to make the airfield unusable. Ships were sighted before dusk off the coast of Laitimo Peninsula. During the night of the 30th of January, 2 Japanese landings were launched, with IJN Landing Force in the north and 288th Regiment on the southern coast of Ambon. The defenders were at a disadvantage to contest the landings, with only a few Dutch detachments were in the area. At Hituyama on the north coast, the defending infantry and machine gun crews were quickly overwhelmed, and bridges on the road leading to Paso were left intact, allowing the Japanese to speedily advance south across the Hitu Peninsula. The southern part contains the major population centers, while Ladha Airfield was across the bay on the northern part. Most of the defenders were located in these areas, but the initial Japanese landings were on the lightly defended north and the least defended area on the south side, well away from coastal guns that guarding the entrance to Ambon Bay. During the 31st of January, the Japanese moved rapidly, reaching Australian defended Ladha from the north and capturing Ambon City in the south by around 1600 hours. A second wave of Ito detachment troops came ashore at Paso at the neck of the Laitimo Peninsula, effectively cutting the island in two. At the same time, the Japanese also snipped the telephone line, causing the Allied isolated and created confusion. The Dutch garrison commander, Lieutenant Colonel Kapitz, ordered his men to continue fighting. However, shortly after midnight, the Japanese captured Kapitz, who had moved his headquarters close to Paso. For most of the 1st of February, the action involved an Allied withdrawal away from Paso and Ambon City, toward the southeast tip of the Laitimo Peninsula. These troops, with Colonel Scott still in command, had their backs to the Banda Sea, and realized that their position was essentially hopeless. On the morning of the 2nd of February, having encircled Ladha, the landing troops, under Commander Kunito Hatakeyama, launched a ferocious assault aimed at dislodging the defenders. These attacks also involved naval artillery, dive bombers, and fighter planes. At around 10 o'clock, Major Mark Newbury, commanding the joint force at Ladha, decided that any further resistance would waste lives in an impossible situation, and ordered his men to surrender. On the morning of the 3rd of February, the Japanese flag could be seen over Ladha, and Scott concluded that if he stayed in this position he would be bombed and strafed. Later, he decided to surrender to Japanese on the same day. By the time that Ambon fell, Captain Kunzio Mori combined Sasebo Special Naval Landing Forces had secured Menado in northern Celebes, and Kendari on its southeast corner. This left the Makassar on the southwest corner, the Celebes field closest to Java. His move on this final Celebes objective was supported by the same naval task force that had backed his landing at Kendari. On 6th February, the invasion forces departed Kendari, and by the 9th of February, Mori 2,500-man combined Sasebo Special Naval Landing Forces went ashore near the town of Makassar. They immediately headed for Makassar town, where they captured a bridge with some KNIL guards. Recognizing that resistance here was a lost cause, the Dutch garrison, commanded by Colonel Marinus Voeren, withdrew northward at Jamba as planned, where the Japanese tanks can't reach them. The Japanese then decided to attack at Jamba, from the north and from the south. They drove with tanks to the northern part of the Gulf of Boni, where they encountered resistance, but that wasn't big enough to stop them, and the other groups consist of IJN land force to the south of Jamba. Then, the Jamba fortifications faced the Japanese from two sides. The Japanese encountered heavy resistance by KNIL troops for several days, but in the night of 27th to the 28th of February, when they found themselves in tactically untenable positions, KNIL Colonel Voeren had decided to leave Jamba to Henrican, where his another detachment located. But they were overtaken by the Japanese troops and eventually captured on the 28th of February. By the time of the capture, there weren't any native KNIL soldiers left. They all deserted. Later, with their command to capture, all the remaining Makassar garrison, number approximately 300 troops at Henrican, surrendered to Japanese.
tennoelga banzai!
After the battle, 1,100 KNIL prisoner of war who fell into Japanese hand were concentrated in the infantry barracks in Makassar. There were a small group of KNIL soldiers in central Celebes, managed to evade capture by the Japanese until early August. All the officers were executed, and those of lower rank were taken into captivity. On Ambon Island, almost 800 surviving Australian, together with 300 Dutch, were taken prisoners. During the entire Japanese occupation, the military administration of Celebes and eastern of Dutch East Indies was in the hands of the Japanese Navy. During the entire Celebes and Maluku campaign, total Allied casualties were approximately 455 men, while the Japanese suffered 85 battle casualties and 225 wounded. The conquest took 50 days for the Japanese to complete the operation. With Celebes now secured, the Eastern Force now left to conquer Timor and Bali to secure their right flank, before they can strike Java, the heart of Dutch East Indies. After the capture of modern air base at Kendari, Java now within the range of Japanese bombers. With Surabaya, where the vital Dutch naval base located also within the range, Japanese can now disrupt the arrival of Abdicom air and naval reinforcement. On Ambon, the Japanese also acquired the use of the Amboina Bay, flanking the route between the Philippines and Australia via the Torres Strait. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned on the channel for the future video, press like, leave comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.